Hi guys, this is Dave Barrett, and this is app number 2 of JavaScript 30, which is a challenge to build 30 apps in vanilla JavaScript alone, no packages, no libraries. And so this is app number 2. What I was tasked to build is an analog clock. And so as you can see, I've done that. First, what we were giving to start with was each of these hands, the second hand, minute hand, and hour hand. They were all facing to the left at probably about 9 o'clock. And what we had to figure out first was I had to figure out how do we animate these, right? So how do we get each of the hands to rotate properly? So I tried a few things. What we did first was the transform CSS attribute, rotate 90 degrees. Now, if you do this alone, if I don't have any of this other code and I just do transform rotate 90 degrees, it's going to rotate at the center point of each of these hands. And so it will kind of look a little bit weird. It doesn't look like a clock. And so what we had to do is I had to redefine that origin point of what this is going to be rotating around. So I used a CSS property or attribute called transform origin, set that to 100%, and that moved the transform point to the end, which ended up kind of being the right hand side of each hand. Now, transform origin, just to kind of give a better explanation of how I like to think about this. I do a lot of video animation and video editing, and I use a program called Adobe After Effects. And there's a similar kind of functionality in Adobe After Effects where you can have, a shape or an object and redefine what they call it is an anchor point. And I have an example here pulled up just to kind of for demonstration purposes of what transform origin does in basically redefining its anchor point or its origin point. So as you can see, if you do transform origin top left, what that's saying is it's going to move the origin point, or essentially the center of this object is what I like to think of it, is going to be at the top left. It's saying this is the new center of the object. Any rotation animation, any transforms or positioning, it's going to happen around this center point, which will be now at the top left. And so on. As you can see, each of these examples, as you move this origin point using transform origin, any rotation happens around that. That's like the center of the universe for that object, is how I understand it. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that explanation, but that's how it kind of works in my brain. So that's what we had to do to get that animation going. Obviously, we added a transition to help that smooth that out. Something that was fun to implement was the cubic Bezier. Being familiar with animation, in the developer tools, I thought it was neat that they have this. Where is it? Just click on one of these hands if it stops moving, right? So if you click on this here, it's going to bring up what's called the Bezier curve or the animation curve, and you can kind of play with these handles, move them around, and it changes the curve of the animation. You can do an ease in, ease out. It's very, very fun stuff. So now that we have the CSS animation out of the way, we had to obviously do the JavaScript functionality of it. And so what I did first, I captured the second hand, minute hand, and hour hand using query selectors, stored them in variables so they're easy to manipulate, then created a function. This is called the setDate function. What it does is it sets the date. And I have set interval function resetting the date right at every second. It's almost kind of like it's listening. Every second it's going to reset the date to its new date, and the animation will happen accordingly. Now what happens in this set date function, for each hand, I recorded, well, first had a date object, said what is the current date, stored that in a variable, got the seconds from that date object, got the minutes from that date object, got the hours from that date object. Now that's all great to have that information, but with the face of a clock being, 360 degrees around that each hand has to move, we have to kind of convert that into degrees in some form, so that each time that the hand animates, it kind of moves the correct number of degrees, so that when it gets around, it'll be at 360. A full minute would be 360 degrees. A full hour would be 360 degrees. The seconds would be 360 degrees, and so on. So that's what each of these formulas are. We store that into a variable as well. And then the last section of each of these is just me saying, okay, now that second hand element, we're going to change its transform CSS property to, instead of being the starting point of 90 degrees, which is up here, it's going to be rotating by this amount of degrees based on what time it is. And so I know this explanation may not be the most clear or concise, but that's how I went about building this app. Now, there was one challenge at the very end that that I had to solve, and that's when each of these hands would go around, like when the seconds would go around all the way 360 degrees, the transform animation, the value actually is 0 at this point. And so when it hits 0, it resets that animation back to 0. And by default, I guess that second hand just wants to jump backwards. And so it's not really smooth, continuous animation where it keeps going around and around. It gets here at a minute, jumps all the way back, gets around again, jumps all the way back, and so on. And so to fix that, what I did here, you can see my code, is I stored each of these elements, second hand, minute hand, and hour hand, into an array. I looped through that array, and for each element I have some sort of conditional, check-in or conditional statement that will say, if the seconds are 0, that transition, we're just going to take that off for a little bit. And then if it's not 0, then do nothing, right? Just set it to null. And this seemed to fix the issue. So I haven't seen that happen again. So anyway, this was really fun to make, and very fun to build. I'm excited to build on the next app. Look forward to your comments and feedback, of course. Thanks for watching, and excited to show you my next app. Thank you.